in business, in medicine, in fine arts, in public service, in broadcasting. Give a big round of hands. I'm told that the acting principal of La Martiniere, Mr. John Stephens, is here. Could you stand up, sir, and be recognized?
Chairman for today. He is a distinguished officer of the Indian Administrative Service and has also been recognized throughout his career as a student and as a professional as one of Kolkata's finest debaters, quizzers, and personalities. So it's a great honor and privilege for us to have you, sir. He is also from Don Bosco, so that makes him perfect because he is going to be neutral today as the hallmark of a great chairman. And I think it was a coincidence that he just wiped his brow because he's already faced fire from both sides over the rules of procedure for today. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you for spending this evening with us. Reverend Dr. Tamasin, thank you, Father, for encouraging us to have this. As an old boy of the school, we are extremely proud and happy to have such a close association with the school. We also have with us our counterpart, Father Tamasin's counterpart, John Stephens, sir. Thank you very much. You have also encouraged us tremendously with your presence today and set the stage for a vigorous and spirited interaction. Father Naren, Vice Principal of the school, Vice Principal of the senior school, thank you, Father, for being with us today. And a very special thank you to all the teachers who have also come, especially some of our past teachers who have come. You have been the ones who have taught us how to speak, taught us how to debate, and it is because of your efforts that we are here today. Distinguished speakers from Alma, distinguished speakers from Alsoc, thank you all for coming out in the colors of your alma mater and agreeing to spend the next hour and a half in the most difficult of places to fight each other. That's the old school grounds. The memories of the debates in school times will surely come to the fore, and we are all in for a great treat. To the organizers from Alma, a very warm welcome, and I hope this will be the first of a regular and annual feature between these two institutions. Welcome all. Please enjoy this debate. It's meant to bring our two communities together. We all interact with each other socially, professionally, and this is a way to rekindle another dimension that was existent in the days past.
Before I call the speakers and moderator to their respective positions, may I invite Alma President, Mr. Vishal Jhajaria, to say a few words on this occasion.
Thank you. Reverend Father Dr. Thomason, Principal of the St. Xavier's Collegiate School. Mr. John Stephen, Principal, Acting Principal, Martiniere School. Father Narain, Vice Principal, St. Xavier's School Collegiate. Esteemed speakers, moderator, Mr. Achhi Bhattacharya, and distinguished guests and the alumnus of Martiniere and St. Xavier's. Good evening to all of you. It is indeed a great honor for me to be here and speaking at this gathering today. Though I'm here as a visitor today, but this is also home for me because I've done my college here. So it's a double pleasure for me. Siddhant and I, we've been talking about organizing this debate for last a year and a half, but due to pandemic or various other reasons, we have not been able to do it till now. And I'm happy that we have finally got this together. And as Siddhant has said that we would want to make it an annual feature. And next year, we look forward to welcoming Alsoc to Martiniere. Debating has always been a long tradition to both these schools. And we have produced one of the best speakers over these years. And I'm sure today's deliberations will have that level of deliberations which we look forward to between the two schools. I'll just take 1 minute to talk about Alma because we are not as old as Alsoc. Alma was founded in 2007. And in these last 15 years, we have about 1,400 members now. And we organize a lot of events with the school and outside school. And we also have a benevolent fund where we help former teachers and alumni in case they need some financial help. I won't take much of time because I think we're all waiting for the speakers to say a few words. I will just thank Alsoc, Siddhant, and Shankar Ramalingam for organizing this debate and hosting us today. And I would like to thank the Alma team, especially Anil Vaswani, for putting this together. And I'll now request Mr. Ramalingam to take this forward. Thank you, everyone.
In the opinion of the House, development is impossible in a true democracy. We will start with the team who is going to speak for Alsoc. Do you want to start with the guest? Wonderful, no problem. So we will start with I had a special reason why I was going the other way around. Since Martiniere is having double gender schools, boys and girls, and we have only boys, we have only one lady debater today amongst us, and she'll be the first person. It's free seating. You can sit anywhere you like. Alma, can you come and join dear? Sharoni Goswami. Are you changing the way you're sitting? Your opposition sits this side. Okay. Okay, no problem. It's all right. Proposition right of the chair. She's already crossing the floor. Yeah, okay. Then we have the second youngest speaker in Martiniere. Is from the batch of 2001, and that is Anirudh. Welcome, sir. Then we have from the batch of 1981, Mr. Pradeep Guptu. This entire program is on live YouTube streaming, so you're most welcome to clap loudly. Then we have a very interesting situation. I just had a small conversation with Mr. Swapan Dasgupta, and I asked him several questions. Did you and Mr. Paranjay Guha Thakuta pass out in the same year? He said, yes. And were you in the same classroom? He said, yes. And then did you go to the same college? Then he said, yes. And there were many things he said. Both are from 71. I can't change the protocol. Both of you walk in, please. Just sorry if it's a little crammed there because the YouTube camera is running there. Now we have the youngest speaker possibly in this debate. In this debate has a generation gap of 45 years between the senior most speaker and the junior most speaker. I did this statistical calculation. Priyam Marik passed out of school in 2016. And then we have a huge gap. Agni Dipto Tarafdar 2008. Devarshi Barat 2003. Palash Gupta 1994. The next speaker has been threatening me for the last 30 minutes. Let's see how he lives up today in the threat. Senior most neurosurgeon, senior most from Alsoc, Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee. The speaking order has been already given to the moderator, sir. Otri Bhattacharya, Mr. Otri, please, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for bringing me up here. May I invite the timekeeper, Krista, to come up here? Our timekeeper, most important person. I would also request our discussants to occupy the two chairs placed for them. Dr. Chatterjee, Mr. Rajan, the two chairs for you there. Hi. We have got to be ruthless. Okay, I think we should, in good Calcutta tradition, I think we're running about 24 minutes behind time so far. And it's an honor to be here. It's also quite intimidating because it's a very heavy topic. And I believe we have people on both sides who are conversant with economics, so you can talk about development. We have an honorable parliamentarian, so we can talk about democracy. There's an escape clause, by the way. The House has very cleverly kept the little true adjective, which offers a way out. As Siddhant pointed out, we can expect very serious debating and perhaps a bit of semantics. We can also expect this to, deteriorate into name calling, which, given the relations between these two institutions as I observed them many years ago, is quite possible. In fact, it was the norm. And of course, as we've seen from television, it's much more fun, name calling. I am in the happy position of being able to be nasty to both sides, with the exception of the Honourable Member of Parliament, because that's dangerous for me. Okay. May we... Sir, the aura remains. And as a bureaucrat, I've always held that discretion is the better part of valor. Okay, now, may we, I must thank Shankar for having got the introduction sheets. May we now invite Polash Gupta, who is a lawyer and a partner from Merchant and Partners. He's from the National Law School of India University, focuses his practice on international commercial arbitration in India and Singapore, and used to be a member of the school debating team. Welcome, Mr. Gupta. The floor is yours to open the motion.
Good evening. As the moderator mentioned, today's motion is that development is impossible in a true democracy. My name is Polash Gupta, and along with my teammates Devoshi, Ogni, Priyam, and Dr. Chatterjee, we will defend this motion in our house today. As the first speaker for the proposition, I'm going to split my speech into 4 points. Specifically, 1, what is true democracy? Is this somehow different from representative democracies? 2, what is development? Is it simply a question of economic growth, or is the concept of development a little more broad-based and nuanced than that? 3, having discussed development and democracy, we'll talk about how we believe the two are largely incompatible. And finally, we'll give some examples of how development has failed in some of the largest democracies in the world today. Let's get to it. First, what is true democracy? We believe that true democracy occurs when the electorate gets together and passes rules, laws, and policies in the absence of elected representatives. This, to our mind, is true or real democracy. It is also very rare. What most of us live in is a representative democracy where the same electorate gets together and the elected leaders of the majority do the same tasks for them. Howsoever you choose to look at it, it still boils down to the same thing. It is the will of the majority that prevails. Now let's talk a little bit about development. What is development? Is it simply a question of some people getting rich at the expense of others, or is it a little wider than that? We believe that development refers to a wide, broad-based basket of rights, social and economic rights, that cuts across and touches all aspects of society and which is sustainable in the long run, and not just over 1 or 2 election cycles. Ladies and gentlemen, the right, keeping and maintaining the right to freedom of speech and expression is a part of development. Having children having access across all stratas of society to basic education and educational tools is a part of development. For various stratas of society to have access to basic healthcare is a part of development. For women, the basic right to remain safe and to be able to take decisions relating to their own bodies and reproductive systems is a part of development. What we believe is development touches across all stratas of society. We believe that the two concepts are mutually incompatible. We've seen time and time again that when people come to power, whether it is through an electoral process or otherwise, the basic fact is they like to stay in power. And how do you do this? Simple. You set the rules against the opposition. Whether this is something as basic as signing off on gerrymandering or pushing through voter identification laws, ostensibly to prevent fraud, but actually to prevent supporters from your voters from voting, or if it's something a little more nuanced, such as passing policies and laws that help the rich and the influential who helped you get elected in the first place, what we see done by elected representatives is pushing policies that help the majority. What gets left behind is the rest of society. This is incompatible with development. Let's take a step back and talk about how development has failed in some of the largest democracies in the world today. Last month, the Philippines, in its infinite wisdom, elected Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte as president and vice presidents of their country, largely on the promise that they would continue with President Duterte's policies. At about the same time, the World Health Organization published a report that was disappeared from their site within half an hour about how children in the Philippines have suffered horribly by not being able to access schools, parks, and open playgrounds since March 2020 till today, with no end in sight, ostensibly under the guise of safety. I believe development has failed them, and so has democracy. Let's take a look at the other side of the pond. The SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the members of whom are nominated by a democratically elected president and confirmed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, over the last few weeks has wiped out about 50 years of development in one fell and quiet swoop. In a little-known case, Western Virginia versus EPA, they removed the EPA's right to monitor emissions and effluents issued by US manufacturing units. In a much more well-known case in Dobbs, they walked back women's rights by 50 years. You cannot choose what you'd want to do with your own body, but hey, at the end of the day, guess what? We've all got guns, lots of guns. This is development. The will of the majority, it leaves the minority behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Palash. I admire your confidence in defining for the House the two critical terms without, brooking any difference. However, when you mention the democratically elected president, it was Mencken, or I think, who said that you have at the most 4 candidates for president and 50 for Miss America. So we know how that goes. I would now call on Pradeep Guptu to open for the opposition. Pradeep, I think, needs little introduction. However, I will be a little redundant and say that he writes on business and economics and was the founder trustee of the Calcutta Debating Circle, has authored several books, and is still a resident editor at the Business Standard. Also one of the founding members of the Bengal Initiative. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Former resident editor of Business Standard. Thank you. I thank the institutions who are behind this great debate, Alsoc and Alma and St. Xavier School, and of course my own school, La Martiniere. It's indeed an honor and pleasure to be here. I come here, the team from La Martiniere comes to this institution with its arm extended in friendship, an olive branch of peace, with goodwill in our hearts, to teach you about debating. Because believe you me, the first speech was a lesson in how not to debate. We will, as the evening progresses, you will notice another great, great injustice being done to the visitors. The opening speaker will not sum up. Some other individual in that team, I'm told, has sort of shanghaied the others into letting him sum up. These undemocratic, undebate-like things show me only one thing. The entire team, La Martiniere, is convinced that debating was not taught in St. Xavier's. So we come with the hand of friendship extended to teach you. Come to us, we will teach you how to debate. Thank you. We had the hilarious experience of a lawyer trying to explain development as the first speaker. It's a proposition, he's supposed to flesh it out. He spoke about democracy, he spoke about development, he spoke about impossibility. I am also a little concerned as an ordinary citizen of this country about democracy. From what I understand, whether it's a president in the Philippines or a prime minister in India or any other functionary anywhere in the world, democracy means only one thing: the right to go and cast a vote so that your voice is heard by your assemblyman in the local assembly, by your parliamentarian somewhere in your capital. Democracy is not about structure. Democracy is not what. Democracy is how. How are you arriving at a decision? I can go and order an 800-ton air conditioning plant for this hall. It will ruin this institution, drive up your electricity bills, completely diminish your water resources. Why? Because I, as an autocrat, am taking an undemocratic decision. But how do you do it? You consult, you talk, you listen, you hear. Democracy is how you run a country, not a president, not a prime minister. It's not a post. It's how you arrive at a decision. So this is how we understand democracy. About the impossibility of it, or should I, since it's the second word, I thought I'd finish with that. I'd go with that. You say it's impossible in a democracy to do anything, or even to approach development, and I'll come to development a little later. It's not. If it was, then you wouldn't have the great economic models that we follow today. There's this gentleman called Amartya Sen. Maybe even somewhere in your legal law course you may have heard of him. He speaks of the capabilities approach to development, which involves taking feedback from the community and from the people, so that development delivers a result that is compatible to the community. There was this other gentleman who was from my college, somebody called Obijit Binag Banerjee. Am I getting it right, Mr. Chairman? Yeah. They didn't teach you that in law course, I'm quite sure. He spoke of something called poor economics, which is entirely democratic in its structure. Please do not tell us about how development is dictated to you. Development is per se a democratic process. And also, you spoke about a certain word you used, I think majority dominates or rules. No majority is stupid enough to say that I will crush the minority and push all the resources towards my direction. Because I know even if 10% of the people in this hall start chucking eggs at me, I'll have a lot of eggs on this white shirt. It'll ruin the shirt. And believe you me, I'm a poor man. I can't afford a second white shirt. So I will make sure that I leave the audience pleased and smiling at the end of the day. Not because, thank you. We are here to tell you that if you do not hear the voice and if you do not allow people to speak or vote or write or approach a court of law, if you do not let them determine how they want development to come to them, that development does not happen. So it is our contention that without democracy, there can be no development. All I'm telling you, in addition, is that it's not a question of representative democracy. It's the how of approaching the problem that you need to learn. As a lawyer, I would have thought it was clear to you. So clearly, ladies and gentlemen, the first speaker for the proposition attended neither his civics class nor his economics class. He understood neither democracy nor did he understand development. We from Martiniere come with a branch of peace. Come to us, we will teach you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. One suspects that the branch you offer is actually a bamboo shoot. But Pradeep said very many clever things, and I'm afraid I didn't quite get all of it, but like another man who said many clever things, but was in many ways quite horrible, unlike you, and that is Winston Churchill, who said democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And I think that's roughly what you said. I would now request Deborshi Borat, who is from the 2003 ISC batch of St. Xavier's, now teaching as an associate professor at the Jindal Global Law School, where he has been assistant dean, whose other interests include theater and fiction. Now, it remains to be seen whether you depend upon theater or fiction.
Yes, please. Yeah. Honorable Chairman, sir, and my long-suffering fellow voters. Now that Churchill has been invoked, I was wondering maybe, had Churchill been here checking out the opposition, the first speech included, he would have let it slip again that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Ladies and gentlemen, for decades now, political scientists have been at pains to empirically validate the thesis that the average voter across countries, across eras, knows, understands, and cares very little about politics as well as public policy, especially on things that actually matter in terms of development and welfare. Does this mean that voters are actually stupid? No, not necessarily. Trump supporters notwithstanding. You see, it's like this. The first speaker of the opposition said, democracy is just about the right to cast a vote. Now, there's a problem with how you cast a vote and what you know before casting said vote. It's not that simple. The thing is, from an individual point of view, a voter has virtually no chance of affecting the outcome of a mass election. Therefore, as a result, at an individual level, the incentive to acquire relevant political knowledge before you cast said vote is so infinitesimally small that it's perfectly rational to not bother. We similarly don't know much about things like theoretical physics or cellular biology, although these things are really important for human development and society in general. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes it is rational to show up for elections, which people do for other reasons, for group dynamics, because of coercion, fear of social sanctions, even violence, or vote buying. At the same time, when people do show up for elections, they rely on different kinds of signals. It's not the deliberative democracy model that the first speaker of the opposition so romantically envisages. We rely on noisy, flashy signals like caste, community, color, religion, politics, status, identity, almost never on merit or policy preferences for development. You don't believe me? Just remember the Bengal elections from last year. Remember Trump, ladies and gentlemen. And which is why political knowledge across societies has consistently remained low despite massive increases in education and information, both of which are now freely available on WhatsApp University in terrible grammar and font. People, however, do want to acquire political information for other reasons, because sometimes they find it interesting. Think about sports fans. When you're reading up on cricketing trivia, you don't do that because you honestly think you're going to change the outcome of a match. No, you do it because you like it. Because having this extra specialized information enhances the enjoyment you derive from the game. Similarly, political psychologists have, for decades again, proved the confirmation bias, where people use, access, and process information that they already believe in, that they want to hear. At the same time, they meticulously avoid evidence which suggests to the contrary. Which is why it's never a good idea to get to the truth. What the objective in this exercise is the psychic gratification of being a political fan. And what about heuristics or information shortcuts? For example, what about cues from opinion leaders? The thing is, we follow these opinion leaders also for the same reason, for their ability to provide entertainment, for satisfying our emotional and psychological needs, which is why we reward them for noise, for controversy, for drama, and they in turn, logically speaking, also adapt their behavior in such a manner so as to tell us exactly what we want to hear, albeit very loudly. Even the most basic template of representative democracy, ladies and gentlemen, means that as a voter, you vote out the incumbent office holder if he fails to perform satisfactorily. To understand that, it's not so simple. You need to understand how to attribute blame. You have to know who is responsible for which issue area. You put Schrodinger's cat in a sealed box, for example, with a copy of the Telegraph and Republic TV blaring in the background, and then see what happens. At the end of a few random subarachnoid moments, you ask who's responsible for the high fuel prices right now. Is it the center? Is it the state? Is it Heisenberg? Is it Nehru? No one will be able to tell you. Your guess is as good as mine. I'll just finish with the last point, ladies and gentlemen, with your permission. India, to overcome its massive socio-economic problems after rapacious centuries of years of colonization, evolved gradually, whether under Nehru, Indira, or Modi, into an authoritarian regime. These kinds of authoritarian democracies show some basic characteristics, such as free and fair elections. But at the same time, the compromise is on the part of human rights and human development. The only empirical evidence we have of real development in the post-colonial era has come from the East Asian tigers. And in every case out of those, authoritarian regimes have led the process of development. If benevolent dictators are the answer, perhaps we have a lot of dictators around, but the challenge is to find a benevolent one.
I suspect it's
Thank you.
time to be a little authoritarian myself.
Yeah, I'm done now. I listen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, I must confess, I felt like one of those voters who understands very little. But what I gleaned from Deboshi's speech was that he's essentially talking about confirmation bias in information, and also that the choice between bread and circuses still holds good and still goes the same way. Before I ask the next speaker to come up, something I should have said earlier. I hope all your phones are on silent. And I think we will be a little more strict about the time limit now. Okay. Our next speaker, Sharoni Goswami. It's a little... It's the passing of time. Two consecutive speakers are actually the offspring of friends, so that shows you how old I am. And Sharoni has done a bachelor's and master's in economics. She was awarded the Jadavpur University Pratibhamani Gold Medal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And she is now with HSBC, but a passionate pride and diversity and inclusion ally. Sharoni, you have the floor.
Thank you. In Australia, out of 44 nationwide referendums on constitutional amendments, just 8 have come to fruition. In one of the largest democracies in the world, women have just lost their control over their own reproductive health. And last evening, my college friends, very democratically trying to choose between 2 pubs to meet, led to ours whizzing by and me spending a rather dull Friday evening at home. Ladies and gentlemen, my last 3 statements may make you want me to go and speak on the podium on the other side. But for starters, my XX chromosome pattern doesn't allow for it. That being said, I'll come to my point. I've just given you 3 instances where democratic approach has not led to progress and development, and amongst us, I assure you, we can come up with 3,000 more. That being said, as side opposition, I need to give you just one. Just one instance on the contrary, and this motion falls flat on its face. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I, Sharoni Goswami, along with side Alma, stand in strong opposition to today's motion. Continuing my earlier line of thought, Switzerland's People's Initiative to Protect Young Individuals from Tobacco Advertisements approved earlier this year. The 1975 Sikkim monarchy referendum, making it a part of India, and its 16% growth, compounded annual growth rate in state GDP between 2015 and 2020. The 2014 Hoke Colorado referendum at JU, showing unanimity of the students and prodding the authorities to take action. My confirmed coffee plans with my aforementioned college friends tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, do you see where I'm going with this? I could probably yield the rest of my time back to the speaker, and still this motion would be entirely disproved. I will, however, not do so. Instead, I will bring to the table 3 lines of argument. The first being an element of time. This motion is not time-bounded. It does not say that within so-and-so time threshold, we expect to see development in a democracy or the lack thereof. On the contrary, it entirely negates even the minutest possibility of development in any democratic setup ever. That's like saying that today we'll go back to caves and for dinner we'll go out as hunters and gatherers, and the fact that we are not going to do that in itself is a prime argument which shows that this motion does not hold water. Democracies are progressing, not regressing, but from that point we seem to be digressing. But I'll drop the wordplay and come to my second argument. We must recognize today the difference between possibility and probability. Red tapeism, slow decision-making procedures, isolated failures do not negate the possibility of development. As an economist, I will bring to the table classical political economics with dialectic materialism. The irony is not lost on me, bringing communist theory to defend democracy, but hear me out. The theory says that every thesis has an antithesis, which completely destroys the thesis, and thereby, through a process of synthesis, a whole new thesis is formed. Now, these are all elements of democracy, and the new thesis is development. That is what comes out of the process. Just because this may be a slow process, just because sometimes we don't get a new thesis. Just because there may be an even better alternative thesis does not negate the capacity of the democratic system to come up with the new thesis, to come up with development, and that should prove once again, beyond an iota of doubt, that development is possible, if not probable, in a democracy. I'll come to my third argument, and I agree entirely with the first speaker on side proposition. There's a difference between growth and development. I will not get into textbook definitions of GDP at factor cost and net national product at market price. It's more holistic, it's not just per capita income. The Human Development Index takes into account education, life expectancy, all as a part of indicators of development. Now, democratic practices, including freedom of speech, voicing of opposing opinions, civil society management, they all indirectly lead to attaining of developmental goals, including but not restricted to the sustainable development goals, something which international, regional, national organizations have all taken cognizance of. Before I conclude though, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the thesis. You've heard the antithesis. You will be called upon to make a judgment. But no matter which side you raise your hand for at the end of today evening, the fact that today democratically we've been able to come and put forward opposing opinions, the fact that you will go back home slightly more enriched, slightly more enlightened than we came today, that, ladies and gentlemen, is progress, that's democracy, and with that I rest my case. Thank you.
A special round of applause for being the first speaker to finish exactly on time. Thank you very much. But what I took away from that was the time limit, and the Black Panthers had a line about that. They said, "No pie in the sky when I die by and by. I want mine down on the ground while I am still around." So, and in fact, as an adherent of Sir Humphrey Appleby, I am quite aghast at the thought of, elected representatives having all the time in the world to live up to their promises. I thought that was the prerogative of bureaucrats. Our next speaker is Ognidipto Torufdar, who has unfortunately been already introduced as the youngest, but I hope he has wisdom beyond his years. Passionate about the history of Kolkata and the fate of Mohun Bagan. I reserve comment.
Good evening, moderator sir, co-participants, audience. The first speaker introduced the topic by saying that there is no such thing as a true democracy, and that at best we have a representative democracy. I am here to tell you that I can take it a little further. Let's make it easier for them. Lamats is so proud of its debating heritage, let's make it easier for them. I am here to argue that representative democracy is a sham. Radical statement? Yes. But hear me out. Argument one, no democracy has ever been born out of a consensus of people. Think of the French Revolution, think of the American Revolution, think of the Magna Carta. In all of these examples, a set of upper-class men came together in a room and decided to give us democracy. We didn't get to decide that we wanted this for ourselves. We simply got it because in their wisdom, they decided this was the best way to go. In fact, if you look at the more modern democracies, you look at India, it's not particularly different. In fact, our constitution was written by a set of people who formed what is called the Constituent Assembly. Now that sounds representative because there are people from all walks of life who were part of this assembly, except, as Mr. Gupta keeps talking about the right to vote being the most crucial aspect of democracy, 30%, less than 30% of India at the time voted to elect the Constituent Assembly. How representative. Less than 30% of India, and who were these people? The people were those with university degrees, those who were the landowning classes, essentially the elite. These are the people who elected a body of people who decided that we should have democracy. And that's how we got democracy, ladies and gentlemen. Very democratic, very representative. And does this situation change after independence? I'm afraid not. 1952, first cabinet, Pandit Nehru, in his wisdom, decided that 50% of India should be represented by exactly one person, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, the only woman on the first cabinet of India. 75 years later, ladies and gentlemen, La Martiniere decides that all of LMG gets to be represented by one person. My second argument is that a large part of democratic development takes place through the actions of those people whom you and I have no part in electing, Mr. Guptu. We have no part in electing the bureaucrats who run the voting process. We have no part in electing those judges to whom you go to if you have a problem with the bureaucrats. We don't get to actually elect anybody who holds the power in a democracy. And if you doubt that proposition, for those of us who have memories of the 1990s when we hardly ever had a functioning government and the government was so busy keeping itself in government that they had very little time to decide what we should eat and what we should wear. Back in those golden days, the country kept running, and in fact, that was the beginning of India's growth story. Who was running the country? If there was no bureaucracy and if there was no judiciary, why do these institutions, especially the bureaucracy, oddly enough, finds an entire chapter dedicated to it within the text of the constitution? Very few constitutions across the world have an entire chapter dedicated to the bureaucracy. They're that important. And yet we don't talk about them. They're the people who are making these marginal decisions. Sometimes I believe that God is more democratic than the Indian bureaucracy because at least you get to choose your God in this country. You never get to choose your bureaucrats. Finally, in true Xaverian spirit, my heart goes out, thank you, my heart goes out in particular to Shapan Babu, who has the difficult job of having to defend debate and dissent in a democracy while the opposition is crying itself hoarse in parliament for the lack of debate. And while Xaverians have been keen debaters through their history, as we have all come to understand, one way or another, the fact is I believe that today's proposition could have been better proposed by the Bharatiya Janata Party. Because they go from state to state, election to election, asking for a double-engine sarkar. Why do you need a double-engine sarkar? Because you don't want too much democracy to come in the way of development. I rest my case, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ognidipta. And the name calling would have been a little more fun if it had been a little less personal for me. But I'm glad to see that you have a slightly exalted opinion of the powers of the bureaucracy. From where I am, it looks very different. And, but, you know, I really do appreciate the bit about the Constitution because as a cynic, one of the few things I'm passionate about is the Constitution and especially the preamble, which apart from being, you know, apart from the principles, is also great prose. So, our next speaker from the opposition is the redoubtable Mr. Poranjoy Goho Thakutta, who has been seen enough on screen and in print. Should I further venture to introduce you? Except that I personally didn't know that you had published 25 books.
It's now 26.
And now 26. I'm a bureaucrat, a little behind the times.
Shall I start?
Please, sir. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Unelected, like all bureaucrats. Since, you know, I have to keep up the tradition, the good old La Martiniere tradition, and continue with the name calling, I wonder who even thought of this topic. I mean, it's got as many loopholes as your biggest sieve would have. First, impossible. Development is impossible. What is possible? True democracy. What is a false democracy? There's an entire institute in Sweden which just looks at varieties of democracy. It's unfortunate that India hasn't been doing too well in their ranking, but that's another story altogether. I hope this topic was not suggested by the only neurosurgeon on the planet who is also an active debater. I give him the benefit of the doubt. He's already vigorously shaking his hand. So, sir, my apologies. I know you didn't suggest it. But on your side, you've got people who say the most ludicrous things. You know, my son is likely to be studying in that same educational institution where Mr. Deboshi Borat teaches. I will tell him about him. He has not been educated in WhatsApp University. My friend Ravish Kumar coined that phrase. But he said, it's never a good idea to get to the truth. He actually said it. It's never a good idea to get to the truth. Pardon my saying so. I hope I've quoted you correctly. I don't know in which part of this post-truth world that you live in. You love authoritarian people, the benevolent dictators. I saw a sneaking admiration you had for the East Asian tigers. Earlier, Mr. Duterte was mentioned. He didn't talk about Japan. Developed in a democracy. He didn't talk about it. It doesn't suit it. You know, talking about confirmation bias, I wonder which echo chamber he lives in. Speaker before him, Mr. Palash Gupta, talked about democracy being the will of the majority. Which world is he living in? Democracy is to respect also the rights, the obligations of the minority. The problems that so-called democracies have is simply because they haven't been doing it. And when you only look at the will of the majority, you don't have true democracy. You have authoritarian regimes, which is what you have in many parts of the world. As we talk today, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa his home has been occupied. I don't know where he's gone. He and his brother switched sides. You know, one was the president, then was the prime minister. Another brother was the finance minister, and so on and so forth. That's our neighbor. They also call themselves a democracy. Of course, we live in a post-truth world. What do these words mean? But the truth is, and everybody knows that, it's not just representative democracy. It's not just a right to vote against your elected representative. It's the right to get everything that you call in the name of development. And here I go along with what my opponents have been saying. It's not just gross domestic product. It's social rights, economic rights, freedom of expression, narrowing of inequalities, etc., etc., etc. Yes, that is true development. But just as you have 101 or 1,001 ways you can develop or talk about development, you can talk exactly the same way about democracy. Mr. Borat talked about Rajkumari, Amrit Kaur. Oh, didn't you talk about? No, that was Ognidipto. Thought of that. Pandit Nehru had his political opponents in that cabinet. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Chopin's Gurudev. You know, I mean, he was in his cabinet. 30% of India vote. In 2019, two-thirds. More than two-thirds of India has voted. Have we regressed or progressed? Question for you, sir. He doesn't like to talk about the bureaucracy. Of course, you don't like to talk about the bureaucracy. There are necessary evils, you know. Atri Bhattacharya is part of that. He has to be there. Who said there's too much democracy in India? One gentleman who used to head the Niti Aayog, early known as the Planning Commission. There can never be too much democracy. Women got the right to vote in India before they got it in Switzerland and many parts of Europe. So let's be very clear. This word impossible gives the game away. Development is possible only in a democracy, and only when democracy is representative, democracy is vibrant, democracy is constantly evolving. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Paranjoy, for taking forward the grand tradition of name-calling and demolition. It was immensely entertaining. And thank you again for bringing up the Constitution and those lovely lines which say that we adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. I love that. Also, these frequent references bring to mind a little bit of pop culture lines spoken by Jaideep Alawat a couple of years ago, where he says, "Ek Gita mein likha hai, par maine WhatsApp pe padha hai." So, our next speaker And this time, for the motion, Priyom Marik. Priyom is from the 2016 ISC batch and now a consultant at All Cap Communications after a master's in journalism and documentary practice from Sussex. Also a poet with a published volume. Priyom, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin with a story. One day, democracy was walking on a road called civilization and ran into development. So democracy asked development, hey, can we be friends? Development said, why not? But with strings attached. So democracy asked, how so? Development said that if we meet in the United States of America, you, democracy, will convince your grandfather, the Constitution, to respect guns more than women. Democracy said, yeah, I can do that, not a problem. But what about if we meet in China? Development said, no, that's not going to happen. You see, the moment you try to enter China, you will go missing. Democracy nodded in approval and said, why not meet in Sweden? Development said, yeah, perfect place for us to meet, to convince the world that we are made for each other, as long as you ignore the gangs that go around killing immigrants for fun. Then, democracy asked development, what happens if we meet in India? To which development said, you know what, I can't quite meet you in India right now. The conditions there are not conducive for my arrival. I will, however, send a doppelganger. Just don't tell Mr. Modi. And then democracy asked, what is the name of the doppelganger? Development said, my doppelganger in India is called Vikas. He claims to be there for everybody. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the point of this story is very simple. It is to tell you that in any relationship between development and democracy, there are bound to be conditions, there are bound to be strings attached, there are bound to be compromises. When the opposition comes and tells us, and in the second speech we hear that their burden apparently today is to just give us one instance where development and democracy coincide. We tell you that in doing so, I'm afraid the opposition today has beaten our central government at lowering the bar for what it takes to win. That is not their burden, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, even before I could contradict it, Mr. Gupta contradicted it in the first place when he said that without democracy, there can be no development. We can waste all of our speeches trying to give you examples of authoritarian countries where there has been development. Whether or not that is good or not is a different matter. It's a different debate. Be it in China, be it in Singapore, be it in Taiwan, we have numerous instances of sustained development in countries that are anything but democratic. But we won't spend too much time on that. Now, let us understand that since the opposition today has taken the liberty of coining the laws and rules and to teach us how to debate, I'm going to take the liberty of coining a phrase. The phrase is electoralization of democracy. What does that mean? That means that elections have become the be-all and end-all in a democracy today, which wasn't the case earlier. Today, when you are in power, you want to retain that power, you want to perpetuate that power. And in order to do so, political parties have realized they need not focus on development, unless, of course, they're obsessed with trending it on Twitter. The only thing they need to focus on when they win an election is how to win the next election. And in doing so, they have ignored development completely. They can do that because they can manufacture public opinion. And the greatest tool to manufacture public opinion is what you guys have been doing while the opposition has been speaking, that is checking out social media, right? Now, we have seen the impact of social media in manufacturing public opinion across the world, be it in Brexit in the UK, be it Donald Trump's election in the United States, be it in Hungary under Erdogan, be it here very much in India under the BJP. And on the India point, if you don't believe me, there is an excellent book called The Real Face of Facebook in India, co-authored by the third speaker on side opposition, who in that very book makes the greatest point about my very point than any of us can do on our side today. The other point I'm going to get at is something we haven't really focused on. Any democracy, whether true in the sense of how my first speaker defined, or representative in what we really live in today, is essentially characterized by checks and balances. We have different wings of the government, and those wings of the government often have very different ideas of what democracy looks like. And what development looks like. Just take the United States, where the executive and the legislature, dominated by the Democrats, believes that women should have the right to abort. Clearly, the Supreme Court, with its conservative majority, doesn't think so. And that is why we've had a rollback in development that was taken for granted across 50 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll clarify what the opposition today really needs to do in order to win this debate. They need to tell you that in a democracy, true or otherwise, there can be development, and that development needs to be defined properly. We feel that that development, number one, needs to be expedient. If in this country you build toilets and then tell us that pani to 10 saal baad aayega, that is not development. We need the water right now. If in this country you build toilets and say out of 20 villages, I have 5 villages that have access to toilets, that is not engaging. You need toilets for all those 20 villages. And the other thing that characterizes development is endurance. If you build a toilet today, and just like so many other governments where the BJP is not in power, it miraculously collapses after a few months, well, then that is not development either. I will just take 20 more seconds and I'll wrap up. Let me characterize the philosophy of the opposition today. The opposition today belongs to the school of cakeism. They believe that you can have your cake and eat it too. Just because you have sufficient conditions for a true democracy, they believe you can have development. What we tell you is that in conditions of a true democracy, all you have is deadlock. And in conditions of representative democracy, they haven't proven to you why development can be expedient, why development can be engaging, why development can be enduring. Just 5 more seconds, moderator, sir. Just five more seconds, yes. And today the opposition reminds me of the master of cakeism in the world today, Boris Johnson. And just like Mr. Johnson 2 days ago, the opposition fails to realize that when you want to have your cake and eat it too, the only cake you're left with is the one that's on your face. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If I might say what resounded with me, I don't think the toilets was a very good example, because for many years in the USA, the Sears catalog was famous for multiple uses. And you did, I must congratulate you for reassuring Poranja that while his views may be scarlet, his books are red. And finally, I have to tell you that when I was in college, our general secretary was Vikas, and he did claim to be there for everybody. Okay. Our next speaker is Mr. Anirudh Chari, whom I know primarily from the world of quizzing. And as long as I live, I will never let him forget that he's the second youngest here. He is an art curator, a debater, and a writer, lectures extensively, including his quizzing teammates. And now he has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, sir. It is not reassuring to know that one is the second youngest person on the panel. In a manner befitting those educated at a Jesuit institution, the arguments of the proposition have been Jesuitical. They have twisted, turned, and not put forward a single point of argument which validates the motion in any way. The first speaker spoke about incompatibility. The motion, sir, speaks of the impossible, not the incompatible. There is a great deal of incompatibility, we grant you that completely, but the motion is an absolute one. Please note that, and we need to disprove the impossibility of that point. You've spoken about democracy in all its forms, but you have not defined what it is to be a true democracy. You have not in any way defined the significant points of this motion. We have been fighting an uphill battle, trying to put points across to this very august audience because you have failed to do your job. Somebody brought up the example of Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, and she, as India's health minister, was a superb person to fill the role, as indeed Ms. Goswami has been for Alma. The whole point is, you have brought up examples, much like Billy Joel's song, from Schrodinger's cat to Nehru to politicians from the Philippines, but you have failed completely and totally to A, set the points of this debate. Representative democracy may be a sham, but where have you told us what true democracy is? You've spoken about development in all manner of ways without actually telling us what it is that you mean by it. Let's look at the various examples that you've brought up. The United States. You keep going on about the United States. Who on earth standing here in the post-Trump world will argue that the United States is a true democracy? None of us is going to do that. You may think that it's some sort of true democracy and therefore validates your points in some way, and for all I know, you're all closet Trump supporters. Good luck to you. But we certainly, on our side of the opposition, do not believe that the United States is or was, or ever will be, a true democracy. There are whole parts of that country which are disenfranchised, and all you do is bring up these examples. You have not given us a single example of what you consider to be a true democracy other than Scandinavia, and your entire point about Scandinavia was that there are gangs, so-called gangs, going around killing immigrants. There are racial killings everywhere in the world. How does that in any way validate your point about the motion? Mr. Chairman, sir, the motion is very clear. In the opinion of the House, development is impossible in a true democracy. These people have failed to define what a true democracy is. They have not told us anything about the impossibility of it. They've merely gone on about plausibility, which is totally different, incompatibility, which is totally different. They have not in any way put forward the terms of this debate. Canada is another example I think somebody brought up. Canada has sent back its elected representatives many, many times. So if that's not a functioning democracy, I don't know what is. There is a school of thought which says that in the great debating tradition, topics are thrown up which lead to the audience being enlightened in some way. I think all that has happened today is the fact that the opposition, i.e. we, and this House has been left thoroughly confused by 4 gentlemen, and I'm sure it'll be 5 by the end of things, who have not come to terms with what they are supposed to do. But being the responsible democratic audience that you are, I am sure that a true democracy, you will absolutely and totally defeat this motion and therefore show that development is possible in a true democracy such as the House in which we sit today. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope Team Alma has been able to provide you with examples thwarting at every stage the, as I said, Jesuitical arguments put forward by the proposition. And it is with this hope that I leave you, confident in the belief that we have defeated this motion in parts and in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirudh. That was vintage Chari, a polemic that indulged in semantics and was essentially didactic, but also quite endearing. Before we call the closing speakers, I want a little vote. We have the choice of asking the closing speakers to deliver, speak, and then going to the discussants, and then having a 2-minute summing up. Is that right? 3 minutes summing up afterwards. Or we can have a 4+2 here where you sum up and then we go to the discussants. The House. Do we bring them back to sum up later or do we ask them to sum up now? Oh, the House is having a good time. Congratulations to the speakers. Okay, right. Now, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, who needs no introduction, not only because of his stature and his, because he's well known, but also because the opposition have enlightened us about him several times.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to begin by answering Anirudh what we think is a democracy. A democracy is a system of government where a majority elects a minority who spends the major part of its resources to retain, relish, and restore its power in every subsequent interaction it has with the majority, a political process which we call elections. Where is development in all this? That, Mr. Chairman, sir, is our contention from this side of the floor. Since self-sustenance represents the best part of the activities of the elected minority that we elect as majority, and since self-preservation and sustenance takes precedence over national development, resources being used for retaining power, not developing national parameters, how on earth can you have development in a true democracy? At least this debate represents something close to a true democracy, and I'll tell you why. Because we have an opposition. In the Lok Sabha, we have no opposition because there is no party with 10% of seats. So Mr. Das Gupta comes from a parliament where the lower house has no opposition. We have an opposition. But development is not possible with this opposition because the leader of the opposition comes and tells us that he's going to give us a lesson in how to debate, and does so most eloquently, except he forgets the most important part of the rule of debating: read the motion before you come to the dais. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, democracy is not of the people, by the people, for the people anymore. Democracy is of the people spelled O-F-F, by the people spelled B-U-Y, and far the people. I would have added a consonant to far if this was not St. Xavier's. As John F. Kennedy said about his father one day, my dad rang up and said, I'm willing to pay for the seats you need to win elections, but don't ask me to pay for the landslide as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you that the organizers here perfected this debate. They gave you an opposition. They showed you by the opposition's arguments how development is not possible. And finally, they chose the one person as the chairperson who is the detrimental factor to all development in a democracy, a bureaucrat. In fact, Mr. Uttri Bhattacharya started by telling you he heard Sharoni Goswami's speech and the first thing he thought about was Black Panthers. In fact, a lot of their speeches made me think about animals. I guess the number of fishes and lions they have on their crest makes me think of all these animals. One of the animals that they made me think of was the cow. You know, in a true democracy, I have 2 cows. I milk my cows every morning. The neighbors have to decide what will be done with the milk. In this democracy in which we live, I have 2 cows. I milk every day. The government takes away half the milk and then charges me taxes for having the 2 cows. That's why development will not be possible in a true democracy. The other problem about a democracy is you have to listen to everybody to come to a consensus. God forbid if you had to listen to speakers like this, but you know, when the cow, talking about the cow and the animals, because I'm keeping up the fish and the lions and all these fishy things that La Martiniere has bestowed upon us thanks to their crest, lots of fish. If a cow dung is there on the rice field, one person in a democracy looks at it and says, this is fertilizer. The other says, this is fantastic fuel for the future. Somebody else says, this is holy increment that has fallen from heaven. And the last person says, this is bullshit. But everybody has an opinion. And that's the problem with the democracy. And finally, I have to talk about a speaker who told us about reproductive health. Because being the only representative of the science of biology, I can't stop but telling you that biology does not believe in democracy. No biological development takes place in a democracy. Darwin told us that years ago, natural selection. Only one person becomes the chief secretary in West Bengal. All of them are additional chief secretary. There are hundreds of them. You know, the human system, and I hate to tell you, in a physiological process called ejaculation, produces 20,000 spermatozoa. 19,999, the majority are lost, do not contribute to development. One may on a good day. So biology has no place. So there is no biological development in a democracy either. Apart from the fact that in this great country of ours, we spend less of our GDP on healthcare than Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, or even Afghanistan does. So much for health development in our democracy. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by telling you, believe me, those educated in a school, brought up on the ashes of a burnt down theater, understand development more than those educated in a school where a rich Frenchman working for the British goes to Oud and bequeaths money to build a school. Believe me, thank you.
Thank you, Shundibda. And this is the grand tradition of debating where, oratory and name-calling are both equally entertaining. But thank you for bringing up the point about the theater in the midst of your theatrics. And I do agree with you that there are far too many opinions in a democracy. You know what they say, everybody has one. So, finally, to sum up, to close, no, not sum up, but the closing speech for the opposition, Mr. Shopun Dasgupta, who really needs no introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's very daunting to be the final speaker after a very distinguished lineup of people from both sides. But I'm in the awkward position at the end of the day to having to state some of the ground rules of debates. Now, the task of an opposition may be something alien to me because I've sat most of my parliamentary life in the treasury benches, a privilege which my friend Poranjoy has denied himself systematically. And one of the things about the opposition is that the task of an opposition is to oppose. The classic definition, if anyone cares to know. It is to ask questions, it's to seek clarifications, it's to point out ambiguities, and in short, try to tell the proposers of the motion that there are certain fundamental shortcomings and flaws in your argument or in your motion, which is a polite parliamentary form of saying you're speaking a lot of tosh. Now, here we have a statement, in the opinion of the House, development is impossible in a true democracy. Now, ideally, this is a line which should be understood in the same way by anyone reading it, whether they happen to be in this hall or outside. But here we've confronted a very unique situation where each of these terms, development, has to be qualified by looking at the footnotes of all these people. What they mean by development, what they mean by democracy, whether they mean true democracy exists only in some of the benevolent dictatorships of Southeast Asia or not. Development means something where sort of Roe versus Wade may not have existed and things like that. Now here we have a very, very peculiar situation. The motion as it is constructed, development. Now, if I was to believe my eminent neurosurgeon friend, we have debated in the past, and he's a formidable opponent, development does not really exist in this world. It exists in the world of metaphysics where people say that the real discovery of yourself lies within you. So in other words, the material world does not matter. Development is now being disengaged and detached from the main world. Because obviously, development, what are the indicators you're going to use? We've been told GDP is not a good enough indicator. I've been told that, okay, the stock market, one which a lot of us who are planning our retirement depend a lot, that's not an indicator. Maybe the Bhutanese model of gross index national happiness is not an indicator. What is an indicator? Maybe Mr. Bhattacharya will tell us that the West Bengal model of actually saying that the more number of people who are in Manrega actually consists of the ultimate stage of development, which has been claimed by the local government here. So, again, an ambiguity there. Next comes this term impossible. Now, I've heard the word not possible. The English language is a very strange thing. It has a lot of ambiguities. It enables all of double entendre. It enables ambiguity. But impossible, it's not possible. It's impossible. Impossible. Now, what does it mean? Impossible. That means there is a complete certitude on this. It reminds me of the writing on the Sorbonne in 1968. Be realistic, demand the impossible. Or as we often go out to campaign and say, Modi hai to mumkin hai. So we understand what impossible does not exist in our dictionary. Then we come to the word true. Now, true is again a very philosophical, abstract term. Last 2 or 3 weeks ago, a friend of mine got into very, very serious trouble with sort of international ramifications for saying on television something which was held to be true but was not real. Now you figure that one out. What is true? I was told it's true that there was a reincarnation of the present chief minister in Kalighat, who happened to be the reincarnation of Sharodama. I was told it was a reincarnation of Rani Rashmani somewhere. Are these true? True? Are we talking about true democracy? Are we talking about truth, philosophical? So when you construct a motion, construct it in a manner in which people understand something universally, and that we don't have to look at in footnotes to say, it actually doesn't mean this, but it means this. It means what you say. As if you've read Alice in Wonderland, it sounds so nice, but what does it really mean? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for so deftly interweaving the political with the philosophical. And I do agree that the truth is largely an abstraction. In both our lines of work, we come across that every day. My lips are sealed. But now I think we shall request the discussants to speak for approximately 3 minutes each, and then come back for the closing remarks, if that's fine. Okay. We start with the gentleman who's sitting closer to the proposition, Mr. Raju Raman. If you wish to remain neutral, I can offer you my mic.
From what the chairperson said, it seemed that I'm supposed to be speaking for the proposition. I had no such ideas.
I said you're sitting closer to the proposition.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sitting closer to someone doesn't get you closer to that particular side in any case. You're sitting close to the government every day, but may not be that you're that close to the government in any case, right? So, now when I look enlightened this evening, but I'm left even more confused from all the arguments on both sides, I must say. Because the way I understand it is, when I talk of development, there were speakers from that side who were trying to define development in a particular way, about freedom of speech, basic education for children, safety of women, and so on and so forth. But as far as I'm concerned, not going into polemics, I think development is when the quality of life of the large section of the population improves over time, over a certain period of time. If that quality of life does not improve, then I would question development. And Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee did, of course, play around with the words of democracy, saying of the people, by the people, BUY, etc., and wanted to add a consonant to the far people and so on. But what it has come down to be nowadays, in most cases, as I see it and as I understand it, and as a layman as I perceive it, is that it has become democracy of some people, by some people, for some people, which I feel is not correct. And how do we change this? How do we distinguish whether a democracy is necessary for development or the two things are interlinked with each other? When I ask a lot of young people in Kolkata, and I happen to be working with the Goethe Institute with the Germans for a long time, and the students who were learning German now, in today's age and time, when they were asked at random, when visitors from Germany came, who are ashamed of their past, and asked them, what fascinates you about Germany? Most of the people, the first thing that said was Hitler. And I'm not exaggerating this. So there seems to be a fascination inherently in our psyche to say, depending on what you see as a result of what happened, then they say, what has he done? Good, he massacred so many Jews, but he built the autobahns. You see what the connectivity is in Europe? So there are people who look at it that way too. So it's a question of whether the quality of life for the majority of the people improves over time or not. We are talking about the Far East, we are talking about certain other countries as well, but are they grumbling? Are they wanting a different setup? I would rather propagate and say that politics aside, all political parties should agree on one thing, that development projects should not face hurdles irrespective of which party comes to power. And I see that in our country, if somebody has done something, if the government changes, you are hell-bent on undoing whatever has been done. And if that can be avoided and that certain things can go ahead as development, I have seen very much in parts of Chennai and South India and so on, irrespective of which party comes to power, next time I go, the 14 flyovers are in place. Nothing has stopped them from happening. But here, closer home, I see that there are deadlines and deadlines and deadlines which go on shifting by a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on. And many people were talking about the role of bureaucrats. Of course, this class was created to facilitate development overall and to advise whoever is in power to reach and attain that kind of development. Unfortunately, we are talking about freedom of speech. Freedom of functioning has been curtailed of the bureaucrats. They have no voice. They are just slaves of the political masters now. And if they had their say, and if they were performing the roles that they were meant to, I'm sure that we would have had a lot of development in our country as well. You said 3 minutes? It's up? Oh. Well, then I would just like to say that Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee talked a lot about animals, cows, how your perspective on cow dung can be, the different perspectives. And if that is going to be democracy, so be it. As long as you don't say that, cow's milk is yellow because it is gold inside, yeah? But these are things which one needs to dispute. Now, there have been some talk about God also here. And now recently, there is a lot of argument about how to worship gods. And there too we have several opinions, and there's a controversy created around all that. So I sometimes feel that we are wasting our time in these kind of meaningless debates. So let us kind of agree on certain development projects, and irrespective of whichever party comes to power, let those be seen to the end, to fruition. That would be my view.
Thank you, Mr. Raman. I'm sure we all agree with you, except that the agreement is very difficult to come by. May I now invite Mr. Utpal Chatterjee to present his views.
Mr. Chairman, forgive me, today has been a bad day. Bad legs, bad throat. Mr. Chairman, we have heard so many speakers, all of you have. Why add to any more pain if some of you have felt some pain? Pain for what some of you may have perceived democracy to be, or development to be. Whatever it is, we have heard lots of versions. I, for one, always knew democracy to be something, and I must congratulate the speakers, the debaters, for having spelled out things very well. I'm so happy a few of the people could speak on the Constitution. I wish there were some more talk on the Constitution. I'm very happy with the preceding speaker, my very old friend Raju Raman, for having spoken about the people at large, serving them, and that being their sense of development. Mr. Chairman, I've been coming to Xavier since 1966. That, incidentally, was the year I passed out, and after that I also joined the college. I've heard a lot of speakers, plenty of variety of speakers, and I've done so many exhibition debates and so many competition debates all across the country, and not to speak of a certain place called Oxford. But having said that, let me tell you, there is a particular strategy every exhibition debate side, has or forms. How the first two speakers, what they take up, what the next speaker takes up, and finally, the person who sums up. Today, I enjoy the summing up immensely, that of my very good friend, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee in particular, and of course, the wonderful Dr. Shapun Das Gupta. Whatever he said, I agree with you. Now, my job out here is not just to agree with both sides, not when one side, the first speaker, says they are going to give the other side a lesson in debating, and that includes, I suppose, ever since debating started. Well, let me tell you one thing. I'm not going to take too much time. I'll make it as brief as possible. Democracy is fine. I can't think of oligarchy or autocracy, but some people did talk of totalitarianism in democracy. Well, that is something to think about. But the fact that you are going to have development also means to ensure that there would be little or no hunger. I remember in the very first year, so many of us who went wild when we read Knut Hamsun's Hunger. And if some of us do go to the village, if some of us had dared to adopt a village, some of us, with whatever means we had, tried to adopt 2 villages. We also sought help from abroad, from our friends. And believe me, unless you see their state, be it healthcare, be it medical, be it healthcare, be it education, be it so many things, it's not there. Where are the 2 square meals a day? In statistics, we are probably among the top 6 of the economies in the world. When you go to the villages, and when you go to other areas, I'm afraid it's terrible. So what development is really coming in a democracy? That is something to think about. I don't know whether it was the Gettysburg speech of Abraham Lincoln, long time back, when he was talking of society being equal. I also remember the famous I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King Jr. And I do remember one portion of that particular speech, Mr. Chairman. He said, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day my daughter will be judged not by the color of her skin, but by the strength of her character. I have a dream. And he went on with all that was wrong with the democracy that the so-called United States of America had. Much in the same way, ladies and gentlemen, I did find sometimes the debate went personal, sometimes people went at each other by name, which also reminds me of the fact that we had a lot of critics, a lot of debaters who had turned instant critics, which reminds me of my last concluding part, the sentence, Mr. Chairman. You know, they love operas in the West, particularly in Europe. And for one particular opera many years ago, it was a premiere and the entire royal family was present. I don't know what opera it was, but a white horse was supposed to appear on stage for a short while. And the conductor was Sir Thomas Beecham, a great wit, by the way. Now, no matter how many rehearsals, the poor horse was a very nervous animal. It was a white horse, looking very regal. But after 2-3 minutes at the premiere, it lifted its tail and let itself go. There was a hush, a royal hush, if you please. Somebody had to save the situation. No, it was not the example of the bull or the cow that I would go to, Shandeep. When the horse lifted his tail and let itself go, Sir Thomas Beecham, who else could save the situation but Sir Thomas? He walked up, went right up, everything was paralyzed. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, pointed at the horse and said, a critic. Mr. Chairman, all the distinguished speakers, my good friend Raju, and all of you wonderful people sitting in the audience, thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much, sir. After that, I doubt if anybody will want to be a critic. But in what order should we invite the closing speakers? The opposition first, I believe. 3 minutes, sir.
It has been the contention of our side of the House that this is an absolute statement because it says development is impossible in a true democracy. There were 3 nodal words that we pointed out in the motion, development being one, impossible being the other, true democracy being the third. Every speaker on our side, my esteemed seniors, Anirudh and of course Sharomi, we have told you again and again that the proposition has done everything other than speak on the motion. We had the unique experience of the first speaker telling us about the Philippines, the US Supreme Court, and so many other things. We had the delightful experience of Priyam coming and telling us about Sweden, which incidentally, most of these Scandinavian countries, Priyam, if I may point out, lead the world in healthcare and education, and they perform a lot better than the really not so democratic island nation of Singapore. There's also a difference in the type of the nation and its size. So we had Priyam saying that, we had Ognidipto who, was so upset by the gender advantage that we have in this debate that he could not but go on and on about it. I'm sorry, there was a point in time when I was perhaps younger even than you. We used to lurk in front of the school, girls' school gate also, with the same, attraction. But those times pass. Once you get into debating, you try to overcome them. And then, of course, we had somebody like Deborshi who so skillfully bypassed the motion altogether. He could give Lionel Messi a lesson in dribbling. I couldn't find anything in his speech that was even remotely relevant to what we were debating here. On our side, to repeat, we have told you that development is inherently democratic. Because development, let me break it down into really small words. You guys have been really bunking classes in school. So let me tell you about development, really bunking classes. I'm really sorry about this. You assess a community and you see a deficiency. Then you come up with a plan to address that problem, whether it is financial or non-financial or relating to justice. You allocate resources to that solution that you have come up with through consultation. You implement it, and then to understand whether you've been throwing your money away or you've achieved development, you assess the impact, evaluate the gains made through the process of development. Development is not spending money. Development is assessing what that money's got to. Sometimes it gets into the pockets of politicians. Sometimes it delivers a benefit. Was that 30 seconds to go or 3 minutes up? 3 minutes up. Oh, good Lord. So I hope I've explained development for you. It's inherently consultative. It's inherently democratic. And some of the economic models I mentioned that outlined by these gentlemen, Mr. Professor Amartya Sen, Abhijit Binayak Banerjee, and so many others, speak of this need to understand the needs of a community and to understand that spending money is not development. Development is assessing the end result of that expenditure. With these few words, I'll only say this, and I've said this again because I really mean it. We from La Martiniere have come to extend to you the hands of friendship. We are here to help you improve your debating. Come to us, we will teach you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. May I now request the House to present the closing speech?
Let's just wait for him to finish. Are you sure?
Yes, there seems to be a little few interjections from the House. May I please silence? You have the floor.
For the second time, good evening, everyone. My first debate in Calcutta in 28 years. It's been awesome. It was nice to see that one of the sides had even prepared for it. As the first speaker for the proposition, it was our duty to define the topic to the best that we could. And we spent what we thought was a little bit of time trying to tell you that what we defined representative democracy or true democracy as something that ends up with the will of the majority. We then talked about development, and we defined it, and we said that development isn't just economic growth, it actually refers and relates to a wide basket of socio-economic rights that helps and touches all aspects of society in a sustainable way so that it lasts for over more than 1 or 2 election cycles. And we set the topic on the floor. I waited thereafter for 25 minutes, through 25 minutes of speech on the other side, about 5.5 minutes of overtime, and 2 minutes of garbage time. And I didn't even hear one attempt made by the opposition to tackle the definition as we had set it. The first speaker of the opposition tried to focus more on the lacunae or perceived thereof in my education than actually talking about the topic. At the end of it, I discovered one difference between my education and his. In St. Xavier's, they teach you how to read the debate topic. The second speaker, and I told her before we started, I was always a little more worried about the LMG intellect than the rest, actually made an attempt to tackle the topic. The problem was, I heard about 5 minutes of examples, which came out neither here nor there. Let me go back and tell my sister from the same august institution, maybe we can do better the next time. Then came the third speaker of the opposition. I believe he was the second youngest speaker in the House today, a fact that came out more often than any other points they made. I sat with pen poised, waiting for the second youngest speaker to make a telling contribution. At the end of 5 minutes, I agreed with him on one thing. He said, and here I quote, "The opposition is thoroughly confused." Yes, sir, we completely agree with you. It wasn't until the fifth speaker of the opposition went up that a serious attempt was made to talk about the topic, to define it, and to put some defense into place. I appreciate your efforts, sir. It was the best thing I heard from your side all evening. It was a little too late in the game. Ladies and gentlemen, the motion today is that development is impossible in a true democracy. We do not believe that the way we have defined the motion, you can have development and democracy side by side, compatible, incompatible, impossible. It boils down to the same thing. I didn't hear anything from the other side that actually went against it. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we go any further, I see that the program calls for the moderator's closing views on the debate. But throughout the debate today, I've already been collateral damage. And furthermore, it is the dharma of the bureaucrat to say as little as possible and reserve his views. And finally, I think I'll stick to the tradition of Don Bosco watching these guys fight it out amongst themselves and maintaining a lordly superiority. So I think I should now invite Father Principal. Shankar, would you do the honors? I would request a round of applause for Crystal, who has done a great job on the timekeeping. Thank you, Crystal. I don't think you have to keep the time.
Thank you, everyone. Are we doing? May I request Father Damasin to give his views on this inaugural debate, and I will also request a Father to present a few mementos to our speakers. We also will have Alma's, the principal of La Martiniere, who is with us, gave a few remarks, and I believe they've also got tokens for all the speakers after that.
A very good evening to all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank the La Martiniers for boys and girls joining us in the debate. And a lot of participants have come to witness this historical moment of our debating circle. So thank you so much, Siddhant, for organizing a beautiful event for both the schools. Thank you so much.
I will start by giving gifts to our visitors from La Martiniere. I'll start with the youngest person. Sharoni Goswami, please. Anirudh Chari. Pradeep Guptu for teaching us debating. Offering to teach. Father, he offers to teach. Again, yes, both of you, sir, Puranjoy and Shopan Dasgupta, sir, Honorable. May I request Alsoc, the youngest boy, to come forward. Priyam Marik. Can I call? Father Naren, please, are you here? Is he here? Let him give a few. After this, I'll call the principal of La Martiniere as he wants to give some gifts. And after that, we'll have these show of hands. And please remain after the show of hands for just 1 minute because we have a vote of thanks by the secretary. Youngest person, Prem Marik, 2016. Agnidupto Tarabdar, 2008. People in La Martiniere also came from Delhi just for this debate. Like that, they came from Delhi just this day. Devarshi Barat also came from Delhi just for the debate. Palash Gupta also did the same thing. He's on a vacation and he managed to attend this debate. Thank you.
Going overseas and not coming back.
And Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee. His patients are on the table. He's going back. That's what he told me. May I request the principal of La Martiniere, Mr. John Stephens, to come here?
Along with
Mr.
Vishal,
Yeah.
the president of Alma.
Good evening, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank Alsoc and Alma for inviting me to be part of this particular gathering today. Definitely, it was a wonderful evening for us to listen to you all. And I picked up one statement from one of the debaters. What is democracy all about? All right. Development all about. That is well-being of people and quality of life. If that is not there, there is no development in the country. So that is that particular point I liked most. Okay, thank you so much.
At the end, I would like to thank Alsoc again for hosting us today, and we look forward to hosting you next year. Thank you. Can we have the gifts, please? Yeah. So we'll start. We'll start with them. Yes. So,
Stephen, would you like to get them up?
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Parik. Agnidipto.
Prem Malik.
Agnidipto.
Agnidipto.
Devarshi Barat. Palash Gupta.
Palash Gupta.
And Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee.
Sharoni.
Ms. Goswami.
Yeah.
Mr. Chari. I think Anirudh has aged in this debate. Mr. Guptu. And anchor speakers, Dr. Das Gupta and Mr. Ghotakurta.
We have one for the moderator, please.
A big cheer. I think this debate is what it was because we had this wonderful moderator.
One for, to the discussions, please. Mr. Raman and Mr. Chatterjee. Yeah. We'd like one to the principal and to the vice principal, please. one to the Reverend Narayan, Vice Principal. And last but not the least, to the Honorary Secretary for hosting us. Thank you.
We have not yet completed our honors. Vishnu, can you give a compliments to Mr. Raju Raman? You can go and give there. It's Father, come. Okay. Utpalda cannot walk properly. I don't want you to. And now all of you will agree. And now we have to request the moderator of this evening, who accepted on a single WhatsApp to be the bureaucrat moderator of the evening. Thank you for coming with your family and cheering us up. We hope to see you more in the future. Please step down to accept a silver salver from Alsoc. I need some volunteers in the audience. Autry, would you like to conduct the show of hands? It's better you do it, then we'll go and count. I need some volunteers from Alsoc.
Okay.
Yeah, we are going to have that.
That's exactly what I'm afraid of, because it boils down to what is essentially a democratic process, and we've had mixed views about that.
We did the online voting on the live stream, so the final score was 21-6 for
We were supposed to go with a show of hands. Siddhant, using the home team advantage, had come up with an alternative electoral or voting process, which we will mention in passing later. because there's always the issue of the Electoral College. And now, when we come to the crux of whether the House has carried the motion, all in favor say aye and raise your hands. Say aye loudly. Aye. And all those who say that the opposition has proved their point, please say nay and raise your hands. You know what? I will take a little bit of liberty. Somebody already mentioned that the electoral process is a failure because bureaucrats run it. So while I personally feel that there was a slightly louder response on one side, I think we can honorably call it a draw.
So as we bring the evening's festivities to an end, we had, in part of our school song is in dramas and debates we excel. We had both drama and debate. It was billed as a debate, but I think we got a 2-for-1. So the drama was the bonus, and we certainly had a lot of that. So my solemn and serious duty is to thank everyone who has come. The timekeeper, can we get a very, very loud applause? Can you please come here? Our brave timekeeper who asserted the primacy of time throughout the process, was often ignored, unfortunately, but we all heard you. Thank you. The other people I'd like to thank is the Telegraph, who have been a part of this debate. You know, they have helped us promote it and reach out. They have also sent a person to cover this, and hopefully it will be newsworthy enough to find mention in addition to come. So thank you all. Thank you to the organizers. A special thank you to Vishal and Anil from Team Alma. They've been part of this from the very beginning. In fact, it was Vishal who was egging me on more than 2 years ago, saying, why don't we do something together? And he also told me, usually, you know, Alma or La Martiniere beats St. Xavier's in everything. That's what he said. Whether it's true or not is different. And now I'm getting a little bored because we've not had a chance to do that in recent times. So anyway, we all enjoyed it. From Alsoc side, Ramadao, you know, he was a very, very good organizer in getting everyone together. For those of you who questioned the topic, in the defense of those who came up with it, I will say that it was decided perhaps over one drink too many at Saturday Club. A very good democratic process. So, you know, the elbow grease kind of went in the wrong endeavor, perhaps. But, and I think the people I'd like to thank most of all is all of you who have stuck with us through and thin, applauded, cheered, listened, and hopefully you go home with a little bit of appreciation for the topic and the debate. And the school administrations from both sides, the Reverend Father Tomasin, Reverend Father Narain, the principal of La Martiniere, you have supported us all throughout. And finally, last but not least, our effervescent moderator who guided the proceedings with great skill and the poise of a practiced and able bureaucrat. So who was neutral right through. So I disagree actually with the people who said that the bureaucrats are the ones who rule the show. The bureaucrats are usually the one who get blamed for everything. So in case you have any problems with the debate or how it was conducted, you know who to blame. And with that, bring this evening to a close, this wonderful evening to a close. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our visitors. And thank you to everyone from Alsoc who's put this together.
Thanks for the experience. It was a lot of fun, thank you. It was a very good debate. It was a very good debate. Very high quality.